America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation, and today we're joined by Eric Eggers. Eric is the vice president of research at the Government Accountability Institute, co-host of the podcast, The Drill Down, and author of Fraud, How the Left Plans to Steal the Next Election. Eric's here to talk about the 50-year mortgage idea, and can they fix America's housing crisis, or will it make it worse? Eric, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Great to be with you.
Well, you know, the housing crisis, it makes it sound like it's this new thing that's happening, you know, in the recent recent few years. This has really been building over time for a very long time. Can you kind of give us sort of the landscape of how we got to here?
Well, that's a great question, Elaine. And, you know, at the Government Accountability Institute, we spend a lot of time kind of looking into government policies and who they benefit. And if there's something that tends to be problematic and everyone sort of recognizes things should be improved, then we try to focus on well, who's making money off of the status quo? And so when Donald Trump floated the idea of a 50-year mortgage, it caught our eye because, you know, as someone who has bought and sold several homes and understands the way that mortgages work and the amortization schedule, I understand the solution, or I understand the problem Donald Trump is attempting to address. But it seemed to me to be a solution that would in some ways only make things a little bit worse, because the math on a 50-year mortgage, quite honestly, is for like a $350,000 house, it might save you $250 a month, I think, in payments, but will actually end up costing you hundreds of thousands of dollars more in interest payments over the life of the loan.
But as an average American, we're seeing car loans. You know, it used to be 4-year car loans, then it was 5-year car loans. We're literally seeing 6, 7, 8, 10-year car loans in California because EVs are so expensive. So for the average American, they're thinking this is just a natural progression.
Well, and to your point, and I actually pulled these stats today for this conversation. So if you permit, I'm going to read this, but I saw this, and this is about Black Friday spending, and I thought it was actually shocking. And this is in no way answering your question, which is how did we get here? But this is about where are we now? So Black Friday spending, and you saw the stats, like a record amount of money spent on Black Friday. 95% of that sales volume was financed. 67% of that is not intended to pay off within 30 days. $1 billion was spent on Friday using the buy now, pay later thing. So to your point, the mindset of the consumer has absolutely changed. And maybe the 50-year mortgage is just a reflection of what a consumer expects now. But the reality is, if at the end of the day we have an affordability crisis, and if homeownership is important because it means you actually are invested in this idea of American dream, you know, there's lots of stats that show you care more about things. Areas are better kept up when people own as opposed to rent. And you know, and there are forces that we talk about in this podcast, and I'm sure we'll talk about today. There are lots of kind of global forces that want us to become a nation of renters that own little. However, it just seems like that's actually a giveaway. The 50-year mortgage is a giveaway to the banks, and it doesn't actually improve the financial standing of many Americans. And that, to me, that's what the Black Friday spending data suggests, right? Like, you get this thing now, but you don't actually own it. You still have to pay for it. And Americans are saddled with debt, and they're not fiscally well off. And that's one of the reasons why fewer people now own homes.
Yeah, I think I've seen stats as high as like 1.5 trillion in credit card debt Americans are carrying, and savings are still at one of the lowest rates in decades.
Here we go. 1.36 trillion in credit card debt, and savings rate is just 3.6%.
Okay, so less less than about a year ago, because I was seeing about 4% in savings. So I get the financial piece of it, but um, what is sort of some of the main drivers of the affordability crisis with housing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there's probably a number of them, but two of them that we've looked at are both environmental regulations, which I think have been going for an extended period of time. I think that helps speak to this is not a new thing. In San Francisco, for example, environmental regulations are said to have added $400,000 to the average cost of a home in that area, which is significant because the average cost of a home in America is $400,000. So environmental regulations are adding the cost of a new home to the cost of homes in San Francisco, and then also immigration. The reality is one of the moves that the Trump administration made is they paused the FHA's giving of or guaranteeing of loans for non-citizens. Now, that's not a huge number, but it does speak to you have people who are in this country who aren't citizens, and that just adds to the demand. And when the demand outpaces the supply, of course, the prices are going to go up, and the prices have gone up. You got a record cost now for what housing is, and you've got, I think, income to price ratios are now at 5-1 when historically they've been at 3-1. So we think that the open border that we experienced for the last 4 years under Joe Biden's presidency, and also the significant kind of increase in environmental regulations, all this green energy stuff, those two factors combined have added to the rise in cost of housing in this country.
You mentioned that the administration has paused FHA lending. Did you say to illegal immigrants or to non-Americans?
To non-citizens.
Non-citizens. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean illegal immigrants. It just means somebody who has status.
And to be clear, it had gone from like 0.2% to 0.6% of all FHA loans. So again, it's not a huge number, but I do think it speaks to look, the Trump administration at the end of the day, I mean, housing is one of the things that they're attempting to tackle as part of this larger push on affordability. So that's one of the reasons why they're talking about giving out stimulus checks. They're talking about going after cattle ranchers because beef prices are struggling to get those down. So I think the Trump administration generally sees affordability as a real problem. And I actually think you're going to start seeing them try to connect dots between their push on illegal immigration and, the ICE raids and the Border Patrol raids that you're seeing happen in different cities across this country, and say, look, part of how we're attempting to tackle affordability is we're trying to get people who shouldn't be in this country legally out of here. And we think that's going to also help kind of make things more affordable.
I mean, do you think Americans really will believe that the illegal immigrants are driving the cost of buying a home? Because, I mean, what Americans kind of envision is that these people are poor and they're coming across the border. And so how would they have the funds to buy a house? I mean, there's some logic there.
Sure. Well, it's a great question. Actually, Peter and I talked about this on the podcast. I don't think illegal immigrants are competing with everyday Americans to buy homes. But what I do think is that you have a lot of programs that give housing for illegal immigrants. And then so if that eats into the competitive market for rent, and that drives rent up. And then now it's like, all right, well, if I'm looking to buy a home, I need to get a house. So I have this much money to spend, and if it costs this much money to rent, then I think it just adds to the overall demand for housing, whether it's renting or purchasing. And so again, when demand increases and supply does not, then prices go up. But I think it's a great point, and I think the Trump administration needs to do a better job. It's lazy to say that the illegal immigrants are making the cost of housing higher. The reality is we have not built more housing, but I do believe it's part of the problem.
And you mentioned environmental zoning adds $400,000 to the cost of a house. So let's just pick a number. If a house costs $500,000, you're talking about a $900,000 home in San Francisco. Is that specific to geographic regions like California, or are we seeing that across the landscape of the country?
That particular stat is specific to San Francisco, and that's due to zoning taxes and other environmental regulations. But it's true that environmental regulations add to the cost of housing by varying factors, across the country, and of course it varies by region. And actually, kind of what we found, Elaine, is there's this, they do this World Economic Forum, and back in 2016, they published an essay called "Welcome to 2030." And in this essay, it includes the line like, "You will own nothing and be happy about it." And so when you consider what two of the dominant kind of priorities of these World Economic Forum gatherings are, they do tend to be open borders and green energy and heightened environmental regulation. So we do think that there's, as we like to say, the Venn diagram has a significant overlap of people that support open border policies and then also support heightened environmental regulations. And we do think that whether it's intended or not, I think those two factors do combine to add to the housing crisis that we're currently experiencing, or at least the increase in cost of housing.
It's interesting that you say that. I went and saw RFK Jr. speak when he was running, and this was probably just before he changed to independent or right after, because he was starting to surge, and I was trying to get him to come on my show. I just couldn't get close enough to talk to him. But he was talking about the cost of housing. The average cost of a house in the U.S. in 2018 was $200,000. And when he was running, so this would have been 2023, that the average cost was now $400,000. But he was talking about this idea of the environmentalists wanting us to be renters. And I was watching the audience, and this was a very diverse group of audience members. I mean, because they were asking, like, are you Republican? Are you Democrat? Are you independent? And so he had a very diverse group of people in this audience, probably about 800 people. And in a small hotel and conference room, basically, or a large banquet room, actually, but 800 people. And they were shocked at sort of the long range idea of that's what they're heading towards, is people renting. Explain that in real terms. Why? Like, why do they want us to rent? Why do they want us to be in such compact housing like that?
I mean, it's this kind of worldview for what the ideal environment looks like. And it's weird because it prioritizes things other than people. Like, I have friends who come from Europe, and they talk about how, like, what does it look like to plan smartly for these future kind of cities, right? And they're like, well, and you got to have space for things like bugs and birds and plants. I mean, as someone who lives in the free state of Florida, where we're actually moving the other way, like we just owning your home is not good enough. We're saying, like, you actually never actually own your home if you still have to pay property tax to the government every year. So they're actually trying to figure out a way to get rid of property taxes so you can, like, truly own it and own it for good. And then you can do whatever you want on this land. But I do think it's this mindset, this European kind of futuristic, that's like everyone is collaborative and we all kind of do things together, and everything is shared. And the idea of individualism is not something that's encouraged through a number of public policies. I mean, even things like mass transit is something that is a collective experience as opposed to individual.
Yeah.
You talk about RFK. I remember Peter and I did a podcast called The Creepy Line. It's about, like, Google and Facebook and how they gather all this information about you and stuff. But we interviewed Jordan Peterson for that. And that happened, this is back in 2018, before Jordan Peterson became, like, famous. And which is why I was able to get him on the movie. And I gave him and his wife like $40 for an Uber after. And I realized after, like, okay, like, I can't do that anymore. He's much more important. But he talked about how cars aren't just like a mode of transportation, but it's a statement about individual sovereignty, right? And because when you have a car, you can do whatever it is you want to do, regardless of what. And mass transit is the opposite. Like, we all have to agree to go to this thing together. And I think that idea, it's like mass transit, but for societies and cities. And so that's very much because the idea is that we have too many people, and we have to be able to kind of figure out a way to coexist in a more collaborative way to better leverage all the resources that we have. I am not an urban planning expert, but that is my amateur attempt to explain this to you.
Right, and that's kind of what I've heard. My daughter took a class on environmental science when she was a sophomore in college, She's a senior now. And one of the essay questions asked how to, it was actually extra credit. And it was asking something along the lines of, what are some of your ideas on how you can control population? Very liberal teacher. And so my daughter was just tired of an entire semester. It was the end of the semester. She was ready to be done. She was tired of hearing all the liberal ideas and the environmental, stuff. And so her answer was Hunger Games.
I mean,
She did not
yeah.
get the extra credit, by the way.
Well, maybe she's got a future as a Netflix producer. What I've heard actually from people who live in like these big cities and they spend time, they go from places that are less that way to more that way, is that when you live in an area where you're much more compact and there's just so many more people in a condensed area, you start to behave more like an insect than a mammal, and it's more of a hive mentality than a different ecosystem. And I do think it's interesting because the ways in which the spaces in which you live absolutely impact the type of life that you do live. And I do think that the idea of being, like everything from, oh, should you really use paper towels after you wash your hands? And I mean, like resources and conservation. And I think, COVID was a very interesting season in society because it was the first time, at least in this country, that public policy was able to dramatically impact the way people live. And the reality is this environmental movement has been trying to do that for decades. Back to your maybe original question, they have done so with little success, but you see glimpses of that, like in California. They say, "Oh, well, we can actually, when we're experiencing, brownouts and things, we can control your thermostat, or we're going to shut off the water because, like, we're going to control these central resources." And that's just anathema to what I think most people think the American idea is, which is individual sovereignty and freedom. And obviously, we have to be good stewards of the resources we have, but the idea is that those are our resources to steward, and the government should not be in control of them. And so I think that is this kind of fundamental philosophical shift that you saw played out in COVID in the most real way.
Well, there is a natural movement. I am in the free state of Florida, so the property tax issue I'm following very closely. And but I do see some movement, and I don't know what the governor's position is on this, but I see the power companies, the electric companies, moving towards sort of flat rate power, but that they get to have some control over your thermostat in the sense that the peak usages will go up if you use more than, and so that's how they're looking to control your thermostat. I don't know that they can directly come in and actually change the numbers.
In Florida, not yet, but they have been able to do that in other states. And I would say, I live in Tallahassee, which is the capital, and I know you know that, but maybe everybody doesn't. So, and we have a city-run utility, and they would love to do that. They would love to control it because the city of Tallahassee is like one of the few liberal areas in the state of Florida, but they won't. They can't do that. But what they have done is offer pricing incentives to say, like, if you agree to use power off peak, like if you agree not to run your dishwasher or your washing machine at certain times when most people are doing that, then we will charge you much less for that. So I do think, to your point, that is like that's a free market solution to the larger problem. But I would say I'd be very surprised. Well, let me say this. I'd be very surprised if Governor DeSantis or any politician that wants to achieve statewide success in Florida allows the utility companies to do that. However, the utility companies are one of the very powerful interests in the state of Florida. So if anybody's going to be able to get away with it, it would be the utility companies.
Yeah, exactly. So back to like the housing piece of it, there's somewhat of a balance that has to be achieved, because are we trying to bring down the price of housing because the people who are currently in their homes don't want to see that, but the people who want to be in homes want to see that? And so is the goal to bring down the price of housing, or is the goal to the people who are in the homes don't even want to see the increase stop because they love the appreciation when they sell their home. Obviously, they have equity in their home. So is the real solution to grow the economy and grow wages to catch up? Or will that ever happen?
I mean, if we had something like a job creators network that was able to promote these pro-economic ideas that would achieve that, then I think, no, absolutely. The best policy idea that I've heard floated was actually from Donald Trump, and it wasn't the 50-year mortgage, but it was the allow people to take their interest rate with them if they decide to buy another home. Because to your point, that we have an interesting collection of incentives. So like if you are someone who's my parents' age and they've been in their home for an extended period of time and their home is appreciated significantly more than what they bought it for, if they still do have a mortgage, then it's probably quite low. So what incentive do they have? Like they would maybe love to take some of that equity out and downsize. But if they have to refinance at a 6% or whatever it is, it doesn't make a ton of sense. And by the way, this is when Peter Schweitzer first started this organization, the Government Accountability Institute. It's all about like government kind of corruption and who gets what benefit from the program. And I don't know that it's true anymore because of the changes in the tax law under Donald Trump in the first administration. But when we first started this organization, it was true that the most expensive entitlement, like the thing that costs the government the most, is actually not, welfare. It's not SNAP or EBT or anything like that. It's actually the home mortgage deduction, because being able to write off the interest on your primary residence, and that is a benefit that disproportionately impacts wealthy white Americans. So they're never going to get rid of that. But just from what costs the tax rolls the most, is that. So I do think you're right. Like they need to figure out a way to kind of if people made more money and the cost of housing stayed relatively the same, then you would see that ratio of 5-1 go back to closer to 3-1, but not because the cost of housing increased, but because people were making more money. So I think that's absolutely correct. I think building more homes seems like a viable solution that doesn't necessarily negatively impact the worth of current homes, but I think you create more affordable housing, you give people a better shot at it. And I think there's a lot of environmental regulations people have elevated that keep that from happening currently, because they're trying to encourage urban infill, and you don't want single family homes. They want to encourage group public housing, things like that. So I think to your point, I think it's a great idea, and I think that's one of the things that the Trump administration has been focused on. I think with mixed success thus far. You heard them say, I think Scott Bessent, when they first took over, like two stats that stood out to them under the Biden administration: more people than ever took European vacations, but more people than ever also used food pantries. So clearly the economy has not been working for everyone. And I think that also speaks to why you see fewer people participate in the housing market right now.
Well, one of the few folks I've heard talk when they're talking about the affordability issue is Scott Bessent, who has said, we're not going to see prices really come down. That's why the goal should be to grow the economy and grow the wages. And I think that's a really honest answer to people, because there's been an expectation of prices coming down. And the reality is they're so inflated from the Biden administration. We're talking about 22% overall inflation. And so, we're back down at like a 3% increase, but that just means we're still increasing from the baseline is new. And so there's an expectation that people thought the prices were going to come, down to some pre-COVID level. And we're just not going to see that, even if the inflation rate gets to that 2.5%, 3%.
So I believe you. And now you've heard Scott Bessent say that, but we haven't maybe heard other people in the Trump administration say that. And I think that's part of the problem. I think Sean Spicer has made this point on other podcasts. He said, listen, even if things got to if things normally cost $3 and they got to $5 under Joe Biden, and we've been able to get that down to $4, then Donald Trump's like, hey, we don't have an affordability crisis anymore. We've got stuff lower. But most people are like, well, I don't care when it happened. The point is, stuff used to cost $3 and it still costs $4. And so I think that Scott Bessent is probably being honest and correct. but then there's going to be a disconnect because President Trump, I have not heard President Trump say prices are not going to go down. I think President Trump has said prices are down. And I think that's why you see this difference and a little bit of frustration. And I think you're going to hear people, and that's why they recognize there's an affordability problem, which is why they're trying to come out with all these different public policy ideas, including the 50-year mortgage. But I just don't think, that's the most effective solution.
I had not heard the idea that you mentioned floated about taking your interest rate with you. That would be a game changer. I mean, that would be an absolute game changer because you got all these people, going back to the Obama administration, we were at 0% interest rate for, years and years and years. And, following the 2008 collapse. And I mean, there's people sitting at 2%. I mean, you can't, there's nothing that would incentivize somebody at a 2.5%, 3% mortgage to go buy a house right now, because they would, the increase they'd go from this house to this house and pay more. It'd be ridiculous.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the reasons why people aren't moving. And they aren't selling their homes for that reason, even though the value is higher. So yeah, it's this weird mix. So I thought it was a great idea. I don't know if they're allowed to do that, what mechanisms they could do. I could see the banks not being in love with that idea.
Right.
So you'd have to, but Donald Trump has taken on powerful interests. Before you mentioned RFK, I'm still sort of in shock that they were able to get some of the stuff done with the food, getting rid of red dyes and things. Cause like if you get it and the fact that you've had states, this is not what you have me on to talk about, but the fact that a number of states has said you're not going to allow welfare money like food stamps to be used to buy soda and sugary drinks is another like radical, very positive, in my opinion, idea for lots of reasons. But one I did not think we would see happen because there has been so much entrenched status quo and they make so much money off of that. Like we referenced a stat in a previous podcast. Coca-Cola's global earnings would drop over 2% if people couldn't buy soda with food stamps in the United States alone. I mean, this is a big part of their business. And so, just anecdotally from having worked with Peter Schweitzer at the Government Accountability Institute for over a decade, when a lot of people are making money off of status quo, it normally doesn't change. So that's an example of like, it has changed in some areas, so maybe it can still change in others. And the Trump administration has shown a willingness to take on, I think, tough challenges in certain respects.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I mean, the things that we have seen happen under RFK Jr. and the HHS has been pretty incredible because it has taken on special interests that people don't even realize when you think about behemoth corporations like Coca-Cola and others. And how that would impact them.
Yeah, I remember when they like the day after the election, or like the week after the election, I saw a buddy of mine who's a lobbyist in Tallahassee, and he represents like the American Beverage Association. He had a picture with RFK Jr. It's like, oh no, but they've been able to still, they have those meetings, they have the conversations, and they still what they did is really smart. They left it up to the states, and the states said, hey, we're going to make the decision. And so, that is actually that's not nanny state. That's not big government saying, here's what we're going to do. Like local control, and the states can decide what the best use of those taxpayers are, even though the federal money goes there. So I think they're doing some very interesting things. And I'm sure for someone like you who studies public policy and kind of comments on it, it is a really interesting time because I think the public policies that they're pursuing are well intended. Under Joe Biden, we spent so much money on like these green energy ideas, and we took oil companies and we turned them into like carbon credit companies, and they're like spending billions of dollars for a government subsidy based on a technology that didn't exist. And they were like wish casting under the Biden administration. I think the Trump administration seems much more realistic.
I agree with their well-intended policies, but boy, they really are fighting the swamp I mean, it's got to be exhausting.
Yeah, well, luckily, Donald Trump appears to be relatively indefatigable, I think is the way you say that. So, and and just zooming out to your point about like the swamp. I do a podcast with Susan Crabtree, who's an investigative journalist, and um, we talked to someone who just won a journalism award, the Dow Prize, and it was about the exposing like the hoax behind the Russia collusion and how all these reporters, the Washington Post, the New York Times won Pulitzers for like the fake news about the Russiagate stuff. And, here we've seen firsthand the way the media completely flipped when Donald Trump became president. And they stopped being interested in reporting on the truth. And they started only being interested in reporting on things that were going to be unhelpful to Donald Trump. And, we saw that firsthand. I worked with Peter Schweitzer on a book called Clinton Cash. And for that book, we gave our reporting about a real story, right? Like people were paying Bill Clinton to give speeches and they were donating to the Clinton Foundation. And they're getting favors from the State Department when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. It's a real story. And the New York Times, Washington Post, Bloomberg, ABC News, they all took our reporting in that book. They ran independent stories on it. It was like a real thing. And then Donald Trump got elected and they all said, oh my gosh, we've been used and abused and we will never do this again. And I was talking to Sean Davis with the Federalist Society about the Federalist website about how they won this award and like why do we think the media is so completely flipped against Donald Trump? And it's just because he does represent such a threat to the establishment, right? And these are all media outlets that work with and have profited from the establishment. Never forget, of all the counties in this country, 6 or 7 of the 10 wealthiest counties in this country surround Washington, D.C. So there's so much money and power concentrated in that area. And anybody that represents a threat to that represents a threat to a lot of people's bottom line. And I think that's one of the reasons why the pushback is so great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Eric, I think we could talk for a couple hours, particularly on all of the things that you and Peter Schweitzer work on at the Government Accountability Institute. But we are out of time. I want to thank you for joining us and giving us your perspective on the affordability crisis and the 50-year loan and some of the other interesting topics we were able to hit. Tell everybody where they can go to find out more about what you're working on at the Government Accountability Institute.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been a pleasure to visit with you and your audience. So we do a podcast, Peter and I, each week called The Drill Down with Peter Schweitzer and Eric Eggers. And you can find all those episodes at thedrilldown.com. We also have social media presence. So if you're on Twitter or Instagram, then you can find our feeds there. But yeah, we do that podcast each week. And I'm also on Twitter, although I don't tweet prolifically. And if I do, it's usually a lame joke about my family or sports. So.
Well, I think that's the best way to do things on Twitter, to be honest with you, or X as they call it now, formerly known as Twitter.
I refuse to do it, Elaine. Like I remember like growing up, I never understood why my grandfather would call them like the Oakland Raiders instead of like the Los Angeles Raiders, and just because he grew up knowing them as this thing. And yet here I am. I will never call it X. I'm Twitter. So like I've become my grandfather. I'm an old man. Here we are.
It's bound to happen to all of us. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts from, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Bye for now.